morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us today. This is Jared from Acquia. We understand that you're inundated with webinars and meetings these days, so we really appreciate you joining us today. We're thrilled to kick off today's webinar, How J.Crew Drives Measurable Marketing Performance Increases with Acquia CDP. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any audio issues, please send them into the Q&A. And I will assist you. If you have any questions for the presenters, please submit them in the Q&A tab as well, and they will answer them at the end of the presentation. Slides and recording of this webinar will be posted to acquia.com and sent to you via email within the next few days. So without further ado, I will pass over to Karen Wood, Senior Director of Product Marketing here at Acquia, to get us started. Over to you, Karen.
Awesome. Thanks, Jared. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Karen, as Jared said. My role here at Acquia is working with our enterprise CDP and marketing cloud customers and working closely with them as I understand their use cases, take it to market. So I'm really excited to talk about J.Crew specifically on this webinar today. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about, J.Crew's, the theme that J.Crew has of why they left an entrenched marketing service provider and chose a CDP and kind of walk through their journey a little bit. So thrilled to cover all of that. So I'm going to kind of divide this webinar into two parts. The first part, I'm just going to give a little bit of a high-level overview of the landscape and kind of how the market got to a place of needing customer data platforms instead of marketing service providers, and just kind of walk through that, set the context, and then we'll dive into the J.Crew case study. Happy to share with you. So let's talk about the evolution of data management and kind of how we got here. And you really can't have a conversation about data management and customer data without acknowledging the realities of today's marketing landscape. So Chief MarTech every year puts out an updated report of all of the marketing technologies that exist. This is the one from 2020, and it basically shows a whole globe of different types of technologies. So there are 8,000 total solutions that marketers and brands can choose from in order to collect customer data, deliver experiences, manage customer data, and run marketing programs. And so all of these tools have their own sources of data, their own methodologies for collecting and storing data. And what ends up happening is every brand has an ecosystem with lots and lots of different tools that are constantly changing, and data just lives siloed and isolated in those systems. And that's really the predominant challenge that marketers and brands have been faced with, and technologists have been faced with, when they try to untap the potential of their customer data. It just lives in all of these different silos, regardless of how your MarTech stack is built. And this stat on the right-hand side here, 83% of marketers say that, yep, the data for customers lives in these different technologies, and it's really hard to unlock and untap it. So that's kind of the challenge, and that's been the challenge forever. That is not a new challenge by any stretch of the imagination. That MarTech landscape has been growing, but it's always been, in, for a long time, hundreds or thousands of tools that marketers are contending with. So many strategies have grown and evolved in order to address that challenge. So data lives in all these different places. What do companies do to try to untap that data, unify the data, and then activate data for marketing campaigns? Well, one way that brands have done this in the past is try to kind of do it themselves, build a data lake, use a data warehouse. Basically, the goal here is they're going to take data from all of those different tools, unify it together into a data lake. So great idea. It's cumbersome from the IT department. Obviously, it's a big project to do such a thing. And it does have some limitations that I think are worth highlighting, particularly for marketers. Because what ends up happening is if the marketing team wants to pull data, to analyze it, to understand where there might be some marketing opportunities, they have to kind of go through the IT department to pull that data from them. And there can be a little bit of a lag time in terms of that request and then getting the data back. It's also putting IT in the role of just constantly needing to pull lists for marketing. So not super strategic work, it kind of bogs down their day to have to do that. And again, by the nature of how this is built, they're sort of the gatekeeper for that data. So the dream of unlocking all of that data, untapping it in order to drive experiences for customers is hindered by this process that gets bogged down between IT and marketing. So that's kind of one scenario, and a lot of companies do that. We'll talk more about this later, but in fact, if you do use a customer data platform, you can leverage your data lake as a data input into that. So it's not necessarily an either or, but it's a conversation worth having of just like, what process are you implementing by choosing one solution or another in order to unify and activate data? So data lake's one. Another choice is CRMs, and CRMs have been around for a long time. In fact, CDPs really grew out of the CRM landscape as an analytical layer on top of a CRM. In fact, I think at one point they were even called analytical CRMs, customer data platforms were. The problem with a CRM is it's built for a sales use case. So for B2B organizations, it's kind of limited in terms of the data it can ingest. It doesn't support real-time use cases. It's not really built for marketers per se. So again, great storage tool, and like a data lake can be an input into a CDP, but as a holistic system to unify data, activate it, have marketers and other teams understand it, it's not really going to cut the mustard. And then finally, we've got MSPs, or marketing service providers. It's kind of a catch-all phrase for basically digital agencies that, through a conglomeration of services work and or some technology or managing technology, basically you're hiring an agency to unify and manage your data for you. Now, what ends up happening is, while it does achieve that goal of unifying and bringing data together so that it's all in one place, it's a similar problem to the data lake in that the MSP becomes a gatekeeper for the data. So once again, marketers or other teams who want to pull lists and understand data, take segments to activate campaigns, they have to go through that agency. And we'll talk about this later, but a lot of times that can be an additional cost. It's definitely a time lag between making that request and also being able to activate the data. So really it achieves the goal, but it sets up this process that's really making it a blocker for teams to understand data, activate data, use data for campaigns. So that's kind of the landscape that has existed. And in fact, CDPs, as you know, every company and their brother is calling themselves a CDP right now. It's become so important for marketers and become a really hot market, which is the reason that lots of companies are doing that, because those other solutions don't fully solve the problem. So, again, you're either setting up a gatekeeping system where teams have to go through another team or another agency, or you're limiting the type of data you could even, bring together in the first place. Those other ways just aren't complete. They just aren't really fully meeting the needs. So CDPs came on the scene as a, SaaS-based, platform-based, fully scalable, real-time solution to solving that challenge. And that's why brands are, instead of going those other directions, really looking at CDPs seriously and using that as the methodology for why to unify data, put it in the hands of marketers and other teams who need it, and then activate it across their whole digital ecosystem from the perspective of a CDP as opposed to, say, a marketing service provider, MSP. So there are four main reasons that customers, just more market landscape stuff. So there are a lot of companies who have invested in a marketing service provider and spent a lot of money with a marketing service provider. But we find in a lot of the brands that we talk to, they're ready to look at a different way. For one reason, they're spending a lot of money on the marketing service provider, but it may not fully be meeting their needs. So there are a lot of companies that are leaving their marketing service provider for a CDP, or at least leaving that agency for the data management part of that relationship. Maybe they keep the agency for creative work or things like that. But they'll leave for four key reasons. One, to get cleaner and more accurate data. And what I mean by that is, as part of unifying data together into one unified persistent database, if you will, it needs to go through an identity resolution process. And the ways that marketing service providers do that is not necessarily super accurate. So marketers and brands are becoming more demanding in terms of the quality of the data that they're going to use to drive their business. They need it to be trustworthy. They need it to be trusted across teams, and they need it to be accessible, obviously. So just the quality and the cleanliness of the data is one reason why a brand might leave their marketing service provider for a CDP. Another reason is direct access to data. In that previous slide that I showed, all of like those alternative methods to a CDP really provide some kind of blocker to access. So marketers or data scientists or brand managers or any team who needs to access data to understand it, so for reporting purposes, or to action it, so for campaign purposes, they have to go through that gatekeeper, that third party. So by migrating from a marketing service provider to a CDP, you're actually giving those teams direct access to data. You're really democratizing the data for those teams. Number three, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but it's a SaaS platform. So rather than a services-based approach, which is gonna, whatever is implemented at the time is kind of stuck in time. And if you want to add additional data feeds or additional even capabilities to the data management approach, it's going to be very manual and cumbersome. With a SaaS platform, it's the opposite. I mean, we roll out fixes and improvements to the platform every 2 weeks. I mean, it's an agile process. So, the benefit of partnering with a CDP is you constantly get the latest and greatest enhancements to the platform just as part of the way it's set up, because it's SaaS. I mean, that's the value of SaaS. So that's a reason people choose to leave their marketing service provider for a CDP. And then number four, and perhaps most importantly, it's a lower total cost of ownership. So basically, you're saving time by giving your teams direct access to data, and you're saving money because you're not having to either pay more every time you need, a new data, batch of data pulled or a list pulled or a campaign activated. There aren't those incremental costs because it's all built into the platform. So there's a lower total cost of ownership as part of a CDP as well. And then I have a couple of slides that just pull out some examples. So this is a very typical type of scenario for any of our customers who are using Acquia CDP. So before the CDP, if they're using a marketing service provider, for example, the amount of time it would take to pull a list for direct mail would have taken 2 weeks. With Acquia CDP, you can do that in 10 minutes. Let's say you want to run a Facebook campaign to a targeted list. Well, without a CDP, it's going to take you weeks, probably, on average, to pull that list. With Acquia CDP, it's a matter of minutes. And then on through all the different types of campaigns marketers want to activate, lots of different things teams need to do. Either it's a lot longer and more difficult without a CDP, or it's simply not possible. For example, giving data to your customer service team or other teams, or even some detailed, sizing, just to size up, is it worth running this campaign? How big is that audience? Things that should be rather simple just kind of aren't possible without a CDP. So, so again, great efficiency gains with using a CDP-based approach. And then there's also, again, a benefit to democratizing data itself. So with a CDP, it's a lot easier because there's not that gatekeeper. It's a lot easier to give all the different teams access in the way that they need it. So for example, giving the C-suite high-level dashboards about the health of the business, or even the board of directors, again, just the health of the business based on data that everyone trusts. Giving data scientists an accurate, clean data set to drill into and slice and dice data. Giving technical teams the ability to directly query data. Giving marketers the ability to directly, again, size out audiences, look at marketing opportunities, surface potentials for actually driving high impact, high revenue campaigns, that sort of thing. And then let's say, for retail or travel, like basically regional offices or store managers or what have you, they need to, look at their local lists against the corporate data set and have that accurate, clean data so that they're not conflicting with, say, a corporate campaign, giving them the access that they need to. And on it goes. I mean, the more teams that get access to data, the more it shares and propagates. We have one, just anecdotally, we have one customer, PVH, who who basically started with 4 individuals with access to the CDP. And over the course of, I think, just a couple of months, they were able to roll that out, and more people saw what the other teams were doing and were like, well, I'd like to get access to that. That's incredible. And they ramped up to, you know, almost 100 different users within a short amount of time, because it spreads like wildfire. Once people see what's possible with getting access to clean, accurate data, you know, every team's going to want to have access to it. So a CDP makes that possible. I mentioned this earlier, but there's also a data quality and in the identities that you're using when you use a CDP versus a methodology through an agency or a marketing service provider. So this was taken from one of our customers, and it kind of gives just the degree in which there's a difference made with an identity resolution solution built into a CDP versus not. The IRE in this slide means identity resolution engine. So without an identity resolution engine as part of a CDP, your buyer count is actually super inaccurate. It's way off. And then that has a downstream effect. So if you try to calculate what the revenue per customer is, let's say, and your buyer count is off, well, your revenue per customer metric is going to be off. The transactions per customer, so you understanding your health of the business, that's going to be inaccurate. And then, so that's all customers, or some data there. And then if you look at like your most loyal customers, your VIPs, the customers that you really, really want to make sure you're engaging with in a holistic way for this customer, and this is very typical, you know, there is an 82% discrepancy between not having the identities resolved into a clean customer record versus having that. And that makes a really big difference in just, again, understanding the truth of your business, understanding where those opportunities are, understanding who your very best customers are, is not really going to be possible if you don't know accurately who your customer list is, like who are your customers. So it has this cascading downstream effect. So the health of the data and the quality of the data that is possible with a CDP is also a really important driver for leaving a marketing service provider in favor of a CDP. And then I wanted to highlight this recent report. It actually just came out last week, but Forrester did research with 4 of our customers, and basically developed a calculation for how Acquia CDP customers can expect a return on investment with a CDP. And again, if you think about reasons to leave a marketing service provider, one of the reasons is total cost of ownership and return on investment. You're either going to spend money with an MSP or with a CDP. What's the payback and return you can expect with a CDP versus an MSP? So with Acquia CDP, a return on investment brands can expect is 589%. And that's a payback of the investment within 6 months. So pretty significant. And then I wanted to pull this out. The report is actually quite lengthy. It goes into a lot of different ways to drive revenue and, you know, the way they got to that number. But this one's absolutely true to a CDP, especially when compared to a marketing service provider. So for number one, it's faster and easier for marketers to get direct access to data. So I just spent a bunch of time talking about that. You know, Forrester is saying, yeah, there's an actual revenue value attached to this increase in efficiency in terms of giving marketers faster and easier ways to access data. The amount of time it saves the technical team. So again, they're not put in the position of needing to pull lists for marketers, pull lists for campaigns. You know, maybe a request for a list comes in and then they have a change to that request. It goes on and on. It's very time consuming for the technical teams, and they can save time and they can focus on more strategic things. And then also the technical teams, so like a technical marketer, a SQL analyst, etc., they can easily access data that is trusted and known within the organization. So they can conduct their own queries and analyze their own data, the things that they need to analyze on top of CDP data, as opposed to the very, very messy, it might be unified, but not cleansed data that might exist in, say, a data lake or an MSP, for example. So yeah, again, a huge benefit and definitely worth taking note of specifically. So I wanted to call that out. And if you're curious about the report, whoops, we'll make it available for you. So that's the landscape, and that's kind of what we're seeing across the board with lots of different customers in terms of the state of the state, why, why they're choosing to leave a marketing service provider for a CDP, and again, why CDPs are so important to so many brands in the market right now. So let's drill into J.Crew, perfect example of a company that did just that. So J.Crew is an interesting company for many reasons. One is they have a huge offline presence. So lots and lots of stores across their J.Crew retail stores, their Madewell stores, and they have factory stores as well. They have multiple brands online too, Madewell, jcrew.com, J.Crew Factory, etc. Really, really big, really distributed multi-brand company that, had a lot of data to manage. And they had been using Experian as their marketing service provider prior to engaging with Acquia CDP. So that was again, they needed to solve that data challenge. They needed to unify data, bring it together, and they were using Experian to do that as their marketing service provider. And they found when they left Experian that they saw a huge increase in accuracy across all of their feeds. So they had 37 outbound feeds. So again, a super aggressive marketing schedule. And by outbound feeds, what that means is taking data from that unified place and then sending it to lots and lots of different execution channels across these multiple feeds. So again, they were doing a lot in terms of marketing to their customers and then using that database. So data quality was a really important initiative for them in terms of why they wanted to look at a different solution other than a marketing service provider and start to look at a more modern way of doing that and started to evaluate CDP. So accuracy in data was one, and then the other one was self-serve. So they wanted to give the digital marketing team, who were doing so many things, the power to really just get their hands on that data themselves. So, so they did start evaluating many different CDPs and looked at alternate ways to doing business other than their MSP. So they wanted to really look at customer insights. So not just activating for campaigns, but to be able to get insights really quickly for the people who need it in order to understand what campaigns would drive revenue in the first place. So they wanted to put insights at the fingertips. So basically activating the insights. They wanted to increase the agility. So, typically marketers want to run a campaign, they learn from it, they want to run a different campaign, they've got lots of things going on at the same time. It's very difficult to be agile when you get learnings from a campaign or campaign results, when you have to go through a third-party agency to pull lists and, get the data and so forth. So they wanted to just speed things up, make it faster, make it easier, and become more agile for their business. And that was a big driver too. They wanted to drive greater revenue and lifetime value. I mean, who doesn't want to drive more revenue? But the truth is, if you're more agile and you have more direct access to the data, you can drive more revenue with your campaigns and then ultimately increase that ultimate metric of boosting customer lifetime value. And of course, the insights, they wanted insights at the fingertips for all the teams who needed them and not have to go through a third party. So for, kind of the main challenges that they had, one was, synthesizing data from stores and online. Classic challenge for retail and specifically. I mean, they do a lot of business through their stores. Most of their business is through stores, even though they have an e-com presence. So bridging the online offline divide, classic challenge, really difficult to do and to get right, especially while maintaining that agility that was also really important to them. So they wanted to synthesize that data together from online and physical channels. And again, the key word here is to do that in a nimble fashion, in a very agile way. I mentioned the quality of the data, but even with unifying it together with their MSP, it was still pretty messy and difficult to action off of. So increasing the quality of that data so that they could correctly understand customer lifetime value, so that they could do super hyper targeting, hyper personalization was really important to them. They also still had data that lived in silos. So even though with their MSP, they were unifying data together, they weren't unifying all of the data. And so, for example, the customer service team wasn't able to A, integrate their data into the data set, and then B, leverage that rich customer data for their calls. So that was a big blocker for them, and that was an important use case to address. Also, just easily see dashboards and reports. Again, having business analysts, marketers, et cetera, be able to just see and understand the data, fully grok it. That was really difficult to do. And then finally, you want to do discounting, tailoring. A common thing that can happen if your data is not correct and accurate and even understandable, you actually can end up over discounting. So you might send a blanket discount just because you try to, want to drive business, but maybe you're discounting to segments of customers who would pay full price anyway. So being able to distill out the customer base to understand who should receive that discount, how much of a discount they should receive, who doesn't need the discount. Impossible to do if your data is messy, and impossible to, and you're cutting into your profit margins if you find yourself discounting to everybody. So that was another challenge they wanted to address. So obviously they chose Acquia CDP. That's why we're talking here today. Again, the key things and the key reasons they cited with choosing Acquia CDP were the data quality, so improving the freshness, the updatedness, the accuracy. Yeah, the updatedness is an interesting. So keeping it up to date. So not just, unified together in high quality, but, it's got to be updated in real time or at least daily. So they had methodologies to do that. So just having the data be up to date as well as accurate was super important. And then also the data quality, of course, to classify customers correctly. So they do use us now for lots and lots of different use cases. They were able to satisfy the use case of bringing data into their call center, and they've been really, really pleased with the results. Shortening those calls, increasing revenue from those campaigns. And, every group that now uses and actions their business off of CDP data has found a positive impact. And they even did some testing and measuring to see, which data is more accurate, the old Experian MSP data versus the CDP data. And they found and quantified that our deduplication, aggregation, and calculations were correct. And they had been actioning off of rather incorrect data previously with their marketing service provider. And that was really important to their business. So their analyst team has the ability now with Acquia CDP to directly query the data. So the SQL, the people who know SQL, the analysts who want to dive deep into the tool, they're able to just get into that, again, cleansed, deduped, super accurate data and query it with whatever it is they need to understand out of the data. There's also a part of Acquia CDP called Snowflake data sharing, which basically lets us share with a customer's own instance of Snowflake. And what that enables technical teams to do is to actually take really rich CDP data and, again, slice and dice it with their own query tools like Power BI or whatever they're using, and even look at that alongside non-CDP data. So, for example, merchandising data, to really drill in and understand the business in far more advanced ways than they would be able to. So the analyst teams were really excited about those capabilities, and that's had a huge positive impact on their business. And then also their objective of data democratization in the first place, giving marketing teams and other audience the ability to, really get in and create complex audiences for understanding their business, and then also for driving campaigns, has really empowered all those different teams who needed to be able to do it. So if we look at kind of the quantifiable results, we're going to see some of the things that a lot of our customers can expect. So if you look at the freshness and, again, how up to date the data is, before Acquia CDP with their marketing service provider, it was updated about once a month or every 3 weeks, 3 weeks after the end of the previous month. And that was kind of the state of how it worked. So if you were to pull a segment, let's say it's a retargeting campaign, the data is not going to be super fresh for that targeting. So with Acquia CDP, it's a daily refresh of all the data. Obviously, it's a mix of real-time data ingestion, if it's a real-time data feed, or if it's a flat file feed that would be updated daily. But in any case, a daily accurate count and customer file to action off of was super important to their business. Secondly, their call center. So call center agents now have access to that clean customer data. Before that, it was pretty much just transactional data and did they call the call center before? I mean, very, very limited data on what those call center agents were able to see. They're also now be able to just ad hoc, on the fly, be able to create audience lists for targeted marketing actions. Should be easy. It used to require weeks of advance notice to the marketing service provider, or a lot of specialized technical skills by the technical analysts. So tapping those SQL analysts kind of more than they would need to be typically if you could put that in the hands of marketers. So now they see people are off to the races. Marketers are able to pull this themselves, do the things that they need to do without impacting the other team members or requiring technical experts or even requiring the MSP and giving it advance notice and all that stuff. They just don't have to do that anymore. They are empowered. Same with reporting. So it used to all be done through one team that was sort of the reporting expert. Everything had to come from that team. It was executed through that team. And it was very complex. So it required a lot of technical expertise in order to just pull reporting. But now a marketer, just anyone, non-technical person can just use a drag and drop reporting interface with hundreds of attributes, get really granular. It's super easy to use, and they can just do that themselves. They don't have to tap into the technical experts within the organization. SQL query access for business analysts. Again, a 2-week data lag. Again, the data wasn't refreshed because of the refreshness of the data. So even if SQL experts were able to get in and slice and dice the data would be kind of outdated. Now it's available, in real time, and they can use accurate, up-to-date data for their SQL team. And then finally, to track transactional behavior of any customer cohort. So another capability that Acquia CDP had is called cohort analysis. So that's basically taking a segment that you might build for a campaign, you freeze that segment in time and can track it, over time and understand that audience in a really deep way. Before Acquia CDP, that was a super manual process, super heavy dependency on technical teams, a long delay to get the insights that they need. And also, again, that gating factor created a bottleneck and made it really difficult to have that data available. Now marketers can just run those queries and, they can pull the cohort analysis out within minutes. So huge difference, huge efficiency gains. I wanted to close, so that's J.Crew, we have a full-blown case study. If you'd like to read more, please go to our website and check it out. But I wanted to talk about use cases in general. Like those were the initiatives and the use cases that were most important to J.Crew. They're important for a lot of companies, but there are hundreds of use cases that the CDP can support across acquisition, retention, growth, engagement, loyalty, really the whole life cycle. And then on top of that, it's analytics and analytical insights across the whole life cycle is a whole bucket of use cases that we can help support and help drive. So a lot of times when we engage, or every time when we engage with a new customer or a prospect, we want to work with you to understand what use cases are most important to your business, how are you trying to achieve those use cases today, and really build a roadmap of how we can build success for your brand, because working with a CDP is not a destination, it's really a journey. And you can see revenue increases, right out of the gate through some kind of low-hanging fruit use cases. And you can continue to layer on use cases after year 1, year 2, year 3. I mean, the Forrester report talks about that. It goes on, and really it's limitless in terms of what a CDP can drive for your business. So it really is helping to transform the way your whole company can access and use and manage data. So again, the use cases that are important to each company might vary, but there is a roadmap to continue to drive revenue and growth for your company when you have a CDP at the core. So again, we'll work with you when we engage with you to ensure your own success based on what those use cases are for you. So we typically will phase it out. This is a typical one, step one, maybe you want to get the insights. And, the way that we have our solution built, you get the insights as soon as data comes into the product, into the platform, I mean. And then getting those insights and then layering more and more use cases. So again, we are excited when we get to work with companies like J.Crew to really operationalize data and drive revenue and results for their business. So that's about all I had to share for today. I'm going to take a couple of questions from the audience, and Jared, please let me know if you see any questions. I see one that I wanted to address. The question is, how exactly did you get the data to the call center agents for J.Crew? So there are actually a few different ways that we can enable call center agents for an organization. So one is we have what we call our 360 API. So if you think about the unified, cleansed, persistent database or data store, that we have an API for that. So you can connect that to any system like a chatbot or a clienteling system or a call center system. So for example, Salesforce Service Cloud or Oracle Service Cloud or whatever the tool is, use the API to send it there. And we have one customer, Archlick, there's a case study about this too, where actually the call center agent, when they're on the phone, there's a script for them to, to read, to engage with them in terms of what products they might want to upsell on the call, or even just noticing, are they part of a loyalty program? Where do they live? Like things an agent should know if they're talking to the customer. Are they high value customer, et cetera? So that's populated into the script, the details that the rep should say coming from the 360 API. So that's one way. And the other way is you could simply just give them a login to the tool. And there's a 360 UI where they could go in. So if they're on the phone with somebody, they can literally just pull up the details about that person. It's coming off of that cleansed dedupe record. So it's going to be super accurate, and it's going to tell them all of that data that they need in order to have a really effective conversation with the customer. So we have lots of our clients with that use case. Question about how are we licensed? So it's all about, it's based on the amount of active customer profiles that you have. So how many customers do you serve? So it's, the pricing will depend on that primarily. And we look at that number after it goes through the deduplication process. So the number of customer records you have after they're resolved through our identity resolution system. And let's see if any other questions come in. Question also, how long does implementation take? Great question. So we have a phased implementation approach. We'll get you up and running within 6 weeks. So that happens out of the gate. And then again, we're going to be phasing it out. So step one is to get in enough insights, data into the platform so that you can gain the insights. We are not unique, but I think one of the great things that we offer with our platform is we have a data model. So we have a methodology of how we're going to ingest data. And what that means is that as soon as data is in the platform, we can get the insight. So all the reports will be populated. It'll be populated with accurate, clean data that you can immediately start to understand and use. We have a web tag. So that's typically one of the early phases, is to bring in your web and event data from the website. And then again, depending on your use cases and how you want to phase it out, we'll layer it on, but up and running within 6 weeks is fairly typical for our customers. And let's see, looking for other questions. So a question about the Snowflake data sharing. The question is sorry, let me see exactly what it says. So how do we have to buy Snowflake? Okay, good question. So our backend analytical data is hosted on Snowflake. So we have our own Snowflake instance just as part of our platform, which means that if you have an instance of Snowflake, then we can share out with that. So if you have one, great. If you want to get one, great. But then it would be basically our CDP data would be copied over to your own Snowflake instance, and that's where your BI team can really get in and slice and dice the data in exactly the way that they need to. Okay, another question. Does Acquia manage the data mapping, data hygiene, data governance aspect of the CDP deployment, or is this handled by a client? Yeah, so actually we will handle that. So we, again, we have a data model in terms of how we're going to map and ingest the data into our system. You don't have to use it, but we recommend that you do, because when you do, it makes it easier for if we roll out new reports or we have enhancements to the platform, everything's in a format where you just can immediately take advantage of it. So again, we've built the data model based on 16 years of experience. So recommend that you use it. But yeah, so we'll handle that part of it in terms of setting it up. In terms of ongoing, adding different feeds, it kind of depends on the feed and what specifically the use cases that could be handled by a partner, for example, or by the client or by us. So again, it kind of depends on the particulars of that. But yeah, that's basically how it goes. So. And then in terms of the data quality, the data hygiene, so that's part of our process. So our identity resolution is truly best of breed within the world of CDPs. That's part of our platform. Now it's configurable. So although we have a default way that we can run through all of the, the data cleansing, the data standardization, we have, national change of address in order to do householding as part of our thing. Once it is in that database, it's elastically searchable, but there's so many things that go into it. But it's configurable as well. So although we have a default way that we perform the identity resolution, for example, perhaps you want to roll up data from one master record into multiple brands, or you want, there might be just different ways you want to configure it. We can absolutely, through our configuration screen, go in and change that however you'd like it to be. But yeah, we will handle that part of it. And I think that looks like all of the end of the questions. So thanks all of you for attending our webinar. If you have more questions, don't hesitate to reach out. It's always a pleasure talking about Acquia CDP. Jared, thanks for inviting me on this webinar.
Absolutely. Great job, Karen. I want to thank you again for joining and speaking today. As a reminder to everyone else who joined, the slides and the recording of this webinar will be posted to acquia.com and shared with you all within 2 days' time. If you have any additional questions, please send them to marketing@theacquiateam.com. And thanks again. Everyone have a great day. Bye.